question. Who here knows when is the primary election for the Democratic Party? Not too many hands. It is actually June 7th, and the last day to register was yesterday at midnight. So, knowing that my topic will be about voting, my goal is to help you guys persuade in future, since yesterday was the last day to register. If you have not done so, it's kind of too late, to vote for Senate, House of Representatives, or the mainstream presidential election. I will talk about 3 topics. I will first discuss the history of voting, and I will split that into the women's battle to vote, and into the African Americans' battle to vote. Then I'll bring it into the present issues that we are facing when it comes to the voting turnouts. Just a brief history, as we are all pretty familiar with. The right to vote was strongly fought for by women and African Americans, and the government was basically dominated by a white man. So let's talk about the women. The women fought for their rights to get heard. The battle began in the 1800s and did not end until August 18 of 1920. That was the enactment of the 19th Amendment that gave them the right to vote. In August 22nd, that's when it was ratified. It was such a narrow enactment that in August 26, Tennessee actually tried to revoke their vote to give women the right. But since it was already ratified in 26, which made it actually a 19th Amendment, they were unable to do so. Just discussing their hardship, I would like to show you guys a quote by Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony was a leader, one of the leaders for the women's rights movement. She basically describes in her quote how the battle she faced for women's rights. It says, "I have encountered riotous mobs and have been hung in effigy, but my motto is, men's rights are nothing more, women's rights are nothing less." I focus on the first part, which she said, "I have encountered riotous mobs." Riotous mobs, being those who oppose her, those who oppose women's right to vote. And hung in effigy. Effigy is like a model, a portrayal that people put on women. That they shouldn't have rights to vote. When in fact, slaves had some type of right to vote before women. In 1787, they were given the 3/5 compromise, which I'll be discussing briefly right now. So in 1787, the 3/5 compromise was given to slaves who were citizens of the United States. Basically, for every 5 slaves that vote, only 3 of them counted, which is way before women. Even after African Americans were abolished of slavery, they had still fought for equality, as we are all pretty familiar with and heard it throughout our whole education history. They were abolished and they had the right to vote. However, due to gerrymandering, they were unable to hardly ever be voting. Gerrymandering is basically an abuse of power. To explain it, really briefly, because it is such a long topic. For example, when African Americans go to a place where they have to vote, in that place there is a white male that asks them questions to make sure they're a citizen of the United States. So let's say the African American goes, and the white male asks him, "So how many senates are there in the United States?" And the African American answers correctly, says there's 100. There's 2 senates per state. Then gerrymandering will be when the white male would ask, "Name all 100 senators of each state." Obviously, that's impossible to answer on the spot. Name 100 senators. I probably have to Google it to know all 100 senators today. So African Americans suffered inequality. They were abused. Some of them died. And most of them suffered unlawful imprisonment. Now, as I showed you guys a quote from Susan B. Anthony, I would like to show you guys a quote from one of the major leaders who we're all familiar with of the African Americans, which was Martin Luther King. In 1975, he gave a speech called "Give Us Ballot." And in this speech, he said, "So as long as I do not firmly and irrevocably possess the right to vote, I do not possess myself. I cannot make up my mind. It is made up for me. I cannot live as a democratic citizen, observing the laws I have helped to enact. I can only submit to the edict of others." Basically he's saying since he cannot vote, he cannot give his voice heard, and he has to live to the life of the voice of others without him giving his ideology, without giving his belief system. And he basically said he was like a slave all over again because he cannot be himself. So these are just briefly 2 battles of African Americans and women. And now I'm going to talk about the present issue of voting. And the present issue of voting is that the younger you are, the less likely you are to vote. And I think that's quite ironic because we are the future. I include myself that because I'm only 18. The younger you are, you're less likely to vote. And I got this graph from my political science textbook, We the People. The author's last name is Ginger. And you can see from the ages 18 to 44, the percentage of voting is less than the percentage of the population. And if you look from ages 45 and above, the percentage of voting is higher than the population in America. Which is quite ironic because when you're ages 18 and 44, you're still looking for a job. You know, you're still career hopping even if you're older. When you're 45 and above, you already have a career set. And to me, it is important for us young to vote because we are the future and we want to have an easier route in the future. We want to elect a representative that can benefit us in a way. If you're a conservative, you want a representative that can help you with your business. If you're a Democrat, you want more government aid. So, knowing that there's many issues, reasons why, a major reason is that voting may be tedious. You know, sometimes you have to wait hours and hours in line. But I want to show you, a picture of this lady. How many of you guys know who this woman is? That old lady in the picture. In January 2016, she was Barack Obama's guest speaker in the State of the Union address, in which this 102-year-old lady stood in line for hours to vote, because she knew how precious that right was. And in the State of the Union address, President Obama acknowledged that. When he talked about the potential and the future that America has, he said he saw it in teachers, he said he saw it in students, but when he was concluding, he went to the electoral voting. And he says, I see it in the elderly woman who will wait in line to cast a vote as long as she has to. The new citizen who casts a vote for the first time. The volunteers at polls who believe every vote should count because each of them in different ways know how much precious right is worth. This lady, 102 years old, stood in for hours to elect vote. Now, why is it important? Well, it's because voting is a part of our First Amendment. We all know our First Amendment has the freedom to speak, the freedom to believe. But what many people don't know is it also gives you the freedom to exercise, the freedom to gather peacefully. It gave people to gather the unions and the labor unions to gather their rights. The freedom to exercise. And for us young voters not voting, we're not using that freedom to exercise. We're not exercising our right, our God-given right, our born-given right. So this is my speech. I hope to have maybe persuade you guys that knowing that voting is not just checking a name on a ballot, but it's actually exercising your freedom. It's actually you being part of a democracy, you being an individual, and you getting your voices heard.